So, hello everyone. I'm Anika Bintalo from Curtin University. So today I'll be presenting our paper named "This is different from the Western world: Understanding password sharing among young Bangladeshis." Dr. Elizabeth Stobart, who is also here with me, and Dr. Robert Beaton co-authored this paper. So password. The problem with password is that they're intended to be private and kept confidential, but password is frequently shared in the real world, and due to many reasons, and one of them is cultural norms. As a result, security and privacy get hampered. Research had been done previously on password sharing, but unlike any other HCI researchers, they are mainly West-centric. Although researchers have also found that cultural background have impact on adopting and practicing security and privacy. So keeping these concerns in mind, we explored password sharing in Bangladesh, which is not a Western country, but an Eastern and collectivist country. Previous studies on password sharing typically found what, with whom, and why passwords are shared. There are a few password sharing studies on Eastern countries, but culture itself was not considered in the methodology of those studies. And just to give you a brief perspective about Bangladesh, Bangladesh is a developing country in South Asia. It is a patriarchal country, and the main religion is Islam. Family is typically the center of social life, and general approach to family life is communal. So these are our research questions. So we wanted to explore why young adults of Bangladesh, who typically have exposure to Western media and also technology, still share their passwords. We also wanted to explore how password sharing relates to cultural norms and expectation of Bangladeshi young adults. For this study, we interviewed 24 Bangladeshi participants aged between 18 and 39. Who are living in urban areas and who have typically completed their education, established a career, and started taking role on the society. And also, they also have exposure to Western media technology. And during our interview, we asked them about their password sharing experiences in day-to-day lives. We followed an MX approach, which means we tried to examine their cultural practices from an insider view. And to do that, we conducted the interviews in Bangla, which is the main language in Bangladesh, and by a Bangladeshi researcher. And due to COVID-19 pandemic, all those interviews were held on Zoom. And after the interviews, we conducted qualitative analysis using grounded theory methodology. During open coding process, we identified few descriptive codes, which gave us an overall idea of how young Bangladeshis shared their passwords. We found that our participants shared their password with family and non-family members. And they usually share their password, like banking, email, social media, entertainment, and different devices password. Our participants sometimes took precautionary measurement when they shared their passwords. And some common techniques were locking, deleting, or hiding their private data. And the majority of the time, our participant felt kind of good about sharing their password. And some positive feelings that they shared were comfortable, in control, and unconcerned. In some contexts, they also felt some negative feelings like fear, discomfort, regret, and obligation. Excel coding was the second phase of our qualitative analysis. We identified two major axes of our analysis. One is steps of password sharing and cultural factors. There are 3 steps of password sharing. They were motivation, expectation, and issues. We identified that necessity, convenience, and protective surveillance kind of motivated our participants to share their passwords. So participants shared their password when there was any kind of necessity, like providing technical assistance to the elderly parents. They also shared their passwords for convenience, which means it wasn't kind of necessity to share the password, but by sharing it, it would bring convenience in their day-to-day lives. The code by P12 describes such a scenario of like convenience. And lastly, about like the protective surveillance, which means that our participants shared their password with parents or elder siblings so that they can protect them from any harms. When the sharer shared their passwords, they usually expected that the recipient wouldn't do any harm and they would voluntarily forget their passwords. Also in romantic relationship, the sharer expected their partners would share the same password that they had shared. Surveillance was expected and in both parental and romantic relationships, and allowing surveillance meant that they had kind of nothing to hide. On the other hand, sometimes the recipient of the passwords acted like they were entitled to know the password. And in romantic relationship, transparency was expected, and one of the ways to be transparent was by sharing social media passwords. Expectation to assist was commonly seen among family members. One of the major issues related to password sharing was the conflict between the motivation and expectation when sharing passwords, and which we termed as interpersonal difficulties. And due to this, our participants experienced emotional burden and also loss of relationship. Then the people shared their when our participants shared their passwords, they also expected the password recipient to respect their privacy by not sharing their information with others. But we have seen that this expectation was not always met, and which also caused like privacy issues. And lastly, about like the usability issues like password management and multiple access problems. This occurred due to the design problem that the system wasn't designed to acknowledge password sharing. It also enhanced some other common security challenges like insecure password behavior. We identified 3 cultural factors of password sharing: gender, social norm, and religious identity. Gender played an important role in password sharing in Bangladesh. So both male and female participants mentioned surveillance by parents and elder siblings, but the nature of surveillance was different based on gender. For instance, the younger brother were surveilled so that they do not get hold of adult content or adult videos, whereas the women were surveilled so that they do not get into any relationship. By relationship, I meant romantic relationship. So then when participant also talked about harassment, they mainly talked like how women's information were used to harass them. And in the family context, we saw that mother's phone were considered as a family phone. So children had more access to their mother's phone than the father's. And due to social norm, parental surveillance was accepted in Bangladesh, although we saw that not all the participants were really happy about it. And culturally, it was kind of impolite to say no. So participants found it really difficult to say no when somebody asked them to share their password. The religious identity was like we saw that our participant kind of cited the reason for sharing or not sharing password. It's because of the religion. So based on our analysis, we proposed a model for understanding access sharing among young Bangladeshis. And we realized that all of our participants kind of knew that password sharing was bad, but they still shared their password because it was necessity to share the password with some relationship for several reasons. And then those reasons were kind of rooted from cultural factors. And when participants shared their password, they were also they had some preconceived expectations as well, and those expectations were also rooted from cultural factors. And we have seen that there was a tension between the desire or to pressure to share the passwords, but at the same time, there was a wish to control the access, and which caused several issues. We talked about interpersonal tension earlier, and we acknowledged that technical solution might not resolve all of them, but we should consider that they exist. And yes, password sharing is very usable, but very harmful for the security as well. However, there has been very little design work to create usable yet secure sharing tools to support cultural factors. Just to begin with, we talked about expanding RBAC mechanism or password management or vanishing mode, so on. And lastly, we also discussed that the definition and the expectation of being a young adult in the East and in the West were different. For instance, we mainly heard about like the frustration of being kind of surveilled, but at the same time, we heard that it was actually accepted, and sometimes participants were kind of happy about it. So to sum up, we explored the factors affecting and motivating password sharing for young adults in Bangladesh. We found 3 cultural aspects and also found 3 stages of password sharing. Our study actually focused on a very narrow segment of Bangladesh, but which we assumed that had less impact of cultural factors. But our study found that the cultural factors still impact in their security life. And we also noticed that the Western-centered design system does not reflect the context of use for many users. So, thank you.
Hello, thank you so much, Annika, for the wonderful presentation. I also want to appreciate the organizers and reviewers for reviewing such a paper. I think we talk a lot about the viewer population, the Western educated, but this is much needed. So I have 2 questions, one from the methodological side. What were the ethical considerations when you collected information in Bangladesh, and how did you translate the interviews from, I assume in Bengali, that was the language which was used, to English, which was represented here?
Okay. To answer the second question, so we say that like interviews were taken in Bangla by a Bangladeshi researcher, which is like me, to be honest, and then I translated it by myself. And then after that, I also discussed it with my supervisors, and it was done like that, in that way. Can you repeat your first question, like ethical concern, right? Yes. So our study was like reviewed by our ethics board. So we have to submit like what are the questions we asked, and we will never ask like their passwords or something like that. So it was reviewed, and then we got feedback, and then we changed our studies accordingly, and only after that we could do our study.
Great. I have one last question. I'll probably follow up later on. Were there any, you talked about gender roles and social aspect, were there any age-related variants which you could see in your results, and did you also analyze how they share their passwords, in what medium?
Yes. So about like the age, I say that we actually did our research on a very niche segment, like which are kind of young. So we can assume that it might not be the same for the elderly users because like when our participant talked, they also talked about like their mothers and then how they share it and so on. But which might be a different. They might have another story which we do not know that yet, but we might want to work on it in the future. And sorry,
How they share the passwords?
it's like it's not very different than the previous studies. I mean, there have been many studies based on like the Western countries, like the medium of sharing password, like by writing it down or by sharing it on Facebook or chatting medium. So there was data on that, but we didn't find anything new. Like there was no cultural effect on that.
Thanks.
Okay.
I agree with the previous question, but I think studying this kind of stuff is very important, and I hope we do more of this. So thanks for that. I'm not sure the extent to which I agree with the title of your paper. Most of what you present reflects my experience and how my friends and family and neighbors and whatever actually share their passwords in the US. So I think it's a matter of degree, I'm guessing. And I'm not sure I can ask a question that probes that further. But did you study reveal a difference in frequency or expectations of males sharing their passwords versus women sharing their passwords?
Yes, but it wasn't about like the frequency. We didn't because it was like qualitative research, so the frequency was not that important for us. But what we analyzed is that the expectation was different from men versus women. So what was expected for women, that wasn't the same. So I think during our presentation we gave an example as well, when like women getting into a relationship was carried more value than men getting into a relationship because of the social context there.
Perhaps the man would be less expected to share his password with the woman than the other guy.
Kind of, and yeah, like more like that.
Thanks very much.
No problem.